The shift from tension to inevitability did not happen with a declaration. It happened with a series of small corrections in posture, language, and readiness. By late February, the global situation had entered a phase analysts would later describe as pre-conflict normalization. Military exercises expanded without formal announcement. Satellites adjusted orbits. Patrol routes overlapped more often than before. None of it was war. All of it was preparation. On March 3rd at 2:14 UTC, a coordinated network disruption affected power distribution systems across several Eastern European states. The outage lasted 12 minutes. Backup grids restored power automatically. Official reports labeled it a technical anomaly. Cybersecurity analysts quietly traced the intrusion signatures to clusters previously associated with state-level actors. Attribution remained unspoken, but assumptions hardened quickly. Within hours, NATO cyber defense teams elevated readiness across multiple regions. The first visible shift occurred at sea. On March 5th, a United States carrier strike group altered course in the North Atlantic without public notice. It did not approach any coastline. It did not conduct exercises. It simply repositioned, maintaining emissions control and extended surveillance patterns. Russian naval observers tracked the movement through satellite and acoustic monitoring. The response was symmetrical. 2 Russian submarines departed northern fleet bases within hours, moving into deep patrol zones under strict communication silence. For several days, nothing happened. That silence would later be understood as the moment when both sides accepted that de-escalation was no longer the primary objective. Stability was, and stability required presence. On March 9th at 12:32 UTC, a civilian communications satellite experienced sudden signal degradation while passing over the Arctic corridor. Backup routing engaged automatically, but latency spikes affected commercial and military networks across northern regions. Investigations revealed unusual proximity maneuvers by an unidentified inspection satellite. No collision occurred, no damage was permanent, yet the implication was unmistakable. Orbital space had become a contested environment without any formal announcement of conflict. By mid-March, economic indicators began reflecting tension. Insurance premiums for shipping routes through the Baltic and North Atlantic rose sharply. Energy markets reacted to rumors of pipeline vulnerability. Governments issued statements emphasizing resilience and continuity. None of them used the word war. On March 14th at 18:32 UTC, an American reconnaissance drone operating over international waters in the Black Sea reported sustained radar illumination from multiple ground-based systems. The drone adjusted altitude and withdrew. Minutes later, navigation interference disrupted civilian aviation corridors across the region. Commercial flights rerouted automatically. No aircraft were lost. No weapons were fired. Yet the pattern of interaction had shifted. Engagements were now being tested at the threshold of confrontation. The first direct casualty occurred without spectacle. On March 17th, a logistics vessel operating under a neutral flag experienced an onboard systems failure while transiting a northern shipping lane. Its distress call transmitted for 7 seconds before cutting out. Rescue teams arrived hours later to find the vessel abandoned. No crew, no visible damage, only silent systems and cold machinery. The incident was classified as under investigation. Insurance firms withdrew coverage from several adjacent routes within days. On land, mobilization moved carefully, not publicly, not completely. Reserve units were notified under routine training schedules. Equipment depots shifted inventory under maintenance pretexts. Rail networks carried unusual cargo patterns at night. Satellite imagery confirmed the movement. Official statements denied escalation. Both could be true at the same time. On March 20th, diplomatic channels intensified. Emergency consultations occurred behind closed doors in multiple capitals. Statements emphasized restraint, dialogue, and mutual security guarantees. Yet troop rotations continued. Air defense systems were repositioned. Strategic bombers conducted extended patrols along familiar corridors, each side monitoring the other through overlapping radar arcs and satellite feeds. The first open confrontation in the electromagnetic domain came on March 22nd. A coordinated cyber intrusion targeted financial clearing systems across several major exchanges. Transactions delayed, markets halted temporarily. Backup protocols restored operations within hours, but confidence faltered. Governments issued synchronized reassurances. Central banks injected liquidity. The global economy stabilized, but only barely. Analysts began using a new phrase: systemic probing. On March 24th, a Russian early warning radar station reported anomalous sensor interference lasting approximately 4 minutes. The disruption triggered automated readiness checks within strategic command structures. Protocols activated, then deactivated. No launches detected, no physical threat identified. The incident was logged as unexplained. For those monitoring the situation closely, it marked a dangerous precedent. Systems designed to prevent war were now reacting to ambiguous signals without clear origin. By the end of March, civilian populations sensed a shift they could not fully define. Emergency preparedness messaging resurfaced in subtle ways. Government websites updated guidance on supply continuity. Infrastructure resilience campaigns appeared on public broadcasts. No one used alarmist language. No one needed to. On April 2nd, the first confirmed exchange of force occurred. It lasted less than 90 seconds. At 04:11 UTC, a U.S. surveillance aircraft operating in international airspace detected missile launch indicators from a coastal defense system. Countermeasures deployed automatically. One missile lost lock and detonated at distance. A second passed within lethal range before failing guidance. The aircraft returned safely to base. No casualties, no debris recovered. Official responses described the incident as an equipment malfunction during routine exercises. Unofficial channels conveyed a different message. Boundaries had been crossed, even if unintentionally. Within hours, retaliatory cyber operations disabled portions of a regional air defense network for approximately 11 minutes. No permanent damage occurred. No infrastructure was destroyed. The action was calibrated, reversible, and unmistakable. Both sides had now demonstrated capability and restraint simultaneously. The pattern repeated over the following days. Small incidents, controlled responses. Escalation contained within carefully measured limits. Analysts began referring to the phenomenon as controlled collision. Each side testing thresholds without triggering total war. Each side assuming the other understood the rules. History offered little reassurance. On April 8th, a series of navigation satellite disruptions affected military and civilian systems across multiple regions. Ships reported inaccurate positioning data. Aircraft switched to inertial guidance. Backup networks compensated, but only partially. Investigations suggested deliberate signal interference. Attribution again remained unofficial. The practical effect was clear. Precision systems could no longer be trusted completely. Human judgment began re-entering decision loops once dominated by automation. On April 10th, a joint military exercise scheduled months earlier proceeded under heightened tension. Aircraft from multiple nations operated within overlapping surveillance zones. Radar locks flickered. Jamming signals intensified. No weapons were released. The exercise concluded without incident. Yet every participant understood the same reality. If a single system misread a signal, if a single operator reacted too quickly, the outcome could change instantly. By mid-April, both governments publicly affirmed their commitment to stability and deterrence. Privately, contingency plans accelerated. Evacuation protocols updated. Continuity of government procedures reviewed. Strategic reserves quietly repositioned. The machinery of large-scale conflict moved from theoretical to operational readiness. The world had not yet entered a third world war, but the conditions that made such a war possible were no longer hypothetical. They were active, interconnected, and increasingly automated. On April 15th, at 23:47 UTC, early warning systems in multiple regions detected simultaneous sensor anomalies across air, sea, and orbital domains. For 6 minutes, analysts could not determine whether the signals represented coordinated attack, technical malfunction, or environmental interference. Strategic forces elevated readiness. Command centers prepared for escalation. Then the anomalies ceased. No missiles launched, no targets struck, no official explanation provided. In the aftermath, communication channels reopened cautiously. Messages passed through neutral intermediaries. Language softened slightly. Phrases like de-escalation pathway and mutual risk reduction reappeared in diplomatic briefings. Yet deployments did not reverse. Patrols did not withdraw. Systems did not power down. Stability had become a process of continuous readiness rather than a return to peace. On April 18th, the first confirmed exchange of kinetic force occurred at sea. Details remained classified for days. A brief statement acknowledged an incident involving naval assets in international waters. Satellite imagery later revealed a damaged vessel returning to port under escort. Casualty numbers were never officially released. Insurance markets reacted immediately. Shipping routes adjusted. Energy prices surged. The conflict still had no name, no declaration, no front lines. But by the end of April, planners on both sides began using the same internal terminology: phase transition, operational conflict, limited war environment. The Third World War had not begun with an explosion. It was unfolding through accumulation. By the final week of April, the operational tempo had stabilized into a pattern that no longer resembled crisis management. It resembled routine. Patrol rotations normalized, surveillance cycles repeated with algorithmic precision. What had once been extraordinary now fit into schedules. The systems designed to prevent conflict were adapting to sustain it. On April 27th, at 0603 UTC, simultaneous navigation anomalies affected maritime traffic across the North Atlantic. Several commercial vessels reported positional drift inconsistent with known satellite errors. Backup systems compensated, but not immediately. For 23 minutes, shipping lanes operated with reduced confidence in automated guidance. Insurance alerts triggered across multiple markets. Within hours, both sides issued public statements attributing the disruption to solar interference. Independent analysts did not agree. The signatures resembled deliberate signal manipulation rather than natural disturbance. That same day, a Russian long-range reconnaissance aircraft approached the edge of a declared monitoring zone in the Norwegian Sea. NATO interceptors scrambled. The aircraft altered course before crossing the invisible boundary. No weapons armed, no communication exchanged, yet radar tracking continued for nearly 6 hours. Observers on both sides noted the same detail. The aircraft maintained a constant distance from a U.S. naval formation moving below. Neither side acknowledged the shadowing publicly. Both logged it internally as escalation without engagement. On April 29th, an undersea fiber optic cable connecting North America and Europe experienced a sudden signal drop. Traffic rerouted automatically through alternate lines. The interruption lasted 11 minutes. Engineers later reported no physical damage, no seismic activity, and no identifiable hardware failure. The only anomaly was a brief acoustic disturbance recorded by deep-sea sensors hours earlier. The data was inconclusive. The effect was not. Military communications shifted to higher redundancy protocols. Financial markets opened with elevated volatility. The first sustained exchange in space occurred on April 30th. A U.S. early warning satellite reported temporary sensor blinding lasting 8 seconds. The event coincided with a close orbital pass by a Russian inspection platform. No collision occurred, no permanent damage resulted. The incident was reversible, calibrated, and unmistakable. Hours later, a ground-based tracking station experienced brief signal interference affecting a separate satellite network. The pattern suggested symmetry. The message suggested capability. On May 1st, civilian populations across multiple regions began noticing disruptions that did not align with any single cause. Banking systems slowed, flight schedules adjusted unexpectedly. News broadcasts referenced technical maintenance more frequently than usual. Governments emphasized resilience. Emergency preparedness messaging appeared quietly on official channels. No one announced war, yet daily life began adapting to its possibility. The first large-scale mobilization signal emerged on May 2nd. Satellite imagery confirmed increased rail movement of armored units across several interior regions. Official statements described the transfers as scheduled exercises. The scale exceeded typical patterns. Fuel depots activated contingency reserves. Air defense units repositioned closer to strategic infrastructure. The movements were deliberate, but not concealed. Visibility itself became a form of signaling. On May 4th at 1922 UTC, a U.S. destroyer operating in international waters reported multiple high-speed surface contacts approaching from beyond radar horizon. The contacts initially matched civilian vessel signatures. At closer range, heat profiles shifted. Small autonomous craft accelerated toward the destroyer's perimeter. Defensive systems engaged automatically. 2 were disabled at distance. A third detonated prematurely. Damage was minimal. The destroyer remained operational. Casualty reports were not released. The encounter lasted 4 minutes. It changed operational assumptions across the entire theater. Within hours, a coordinated cyber operation disrupted port logistics systems across 3 major commercial hubs. Automated cranes halted, cargo manifests corrupted, shipping schedules collapsed. Restoration took nearly a full day. Global trade lost 72 hours in a single event. Governments began discussing rationing contingencies internally. Public statements emphasized resilience and continuity. On May 6th, the first confirmed aerial loss occurred. A reconnaissance drone operating over open ocean lost communication after reporting sustained electronic interference. Radar tracking indicated a sudden altitude drop followed by signal termination. No wreckage recovered, no claim issued. Both sides adjusted rules of engagement quietly. Autonomous systems were granted expanded authority to respond to perceived threats within defined parameters. The war, still undeclared, was learning how to operate. On May 9th, a coordinated satellite maneuver brought multiple observation platforms into overlapping orbital paths above the Arctic corridor. Proximity operations increased risk of collision without ever making contact. Fuel consumption rates for several satellites rose sharply as they adjusted position repeatedly. Orbital lifespans shortened. Redundancy eroded. No direct attack occurred. The effect was a cumulative degradation of surveillance confidence. On May 9th at 0402 UTC, early warning networks detected simultaneous launch signatures from multiple coastal regions. Analysts could not immediately determine whether the signals represented missile tests, decoys, or sensor ghosts. Strategic forces elevated readiness. Command centers initiated verification protocols. For 9 minutes, uncertainty dominated. Then the signatures resolved as false positives triggered by atmospheric interference in signal reflection. No launches confirmed, no strikes occurred. The reaction, however, remained. Readiness levels stayed elevated for hours afterward. Human judgment was re-entering command loops more frequently. Automation, once trusted implicitly, now required constant verification. On May 10th, the first sustained naval engagement occurred in open ocean. Details remained classified, but satellite imagery later revealed debris fields consistent with missile interception rather than direct hits. Both sides reported training incidents within hours of each other. Neither acknowledged damage. Insurance markets reacted immediately. Several shipping corridors were temporarily abandoned by commercial traffic. By mid-May, global supply chains began showing strain. Energy prices surged. Food distribution networks adjusted to uncertain transit routes. Governments released strategic reserves in limited quantities. Public messaging emphasized stability while quietly preparing for disruption. The psychological front expanded beyond military planners into civilian awareness. On May 12th, a coordinated cyber intrusion targeted air traffic management systems across multiple regions. Flights diverted, radar displays flickered. Backup systems engaged successfully, preventing accidents. The incident lasted 21 minutes. Investigations traced the intrusion through layered proxies and mirrored signatures. Attribution remained officially unassigned. Internally, both sides updated contingency plans for degraded civilian infrastructure during sustained conflict conditions. The first acknowledged casualties on land occurred on May 14th. A logistics convoy traveling near a contested border region experienced a sudden explosion attributed to an unidentified aerial munition. Damage was localized. Casualty numbers were minimal but confirmed. Official responses described the event as an isolated incident. Troop deployments in the region increased within hours. The pattern of controlled collision continued, each side inflicting damage just short of escalation, each assuming the other understood the boundaries, each adjusting doctrine incrementally. On May 16th, financial markets experienced the largest single-day fluctuation since the beginning of the crisis. Automated trading systems responded to uncertainty signals generated by disrupted communications networks. Exchanges halted temporarily to prevent cascading failures. Governments coordinated stabilization measures. Public statements reassured populations that systems remain secure. Internally, contingency planning accelerated. On May 18th, early warning systems again detected anomalous launch signatures. This time, the signals persisted longer. Analysts prepared worst-case scenarios. Strategic forces moved to heightened readiness across multiple domains. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the signals faded. Later analysis suggested a cascade of sensor interference triggered by orbital debris and atmospheric conditions. The distinction between accident and attack was becoming increasingly difficult to determine in real time. Afterward, communication channels reopened through neutral intermediaries. Messages emphasized restraint, risk reduction, and mutual awareness. Yet no deployments reversed, no forces withdrew. The machinery of conflict continued moving forward through inertia and planning rather than explicit decision. On May 20th, the first large-scale engagement involving multiple Allied units occurred in the North Atlantic. Surface vessels from several nations maneuvered within overlapping operational grids. Radar locks activated briefly. Jamming signals intensified. Warning shots were fired electronically rather than kinetically. No missiles launched. The standoff lasted 14 hours. It ended without casualties. It ended without resolution. By late May, analysts across multiple governments began using the same internal term: irreversible phase. The war still had no formal declaration, no defined front lines, no official beginning. But the systems sustaining global stability were now managing continuous conflict rather than preventing it. And beneath the controlled responses, beneath the calibrated strikes and irreversible disruptions, one reality became impossible to ignore. The next major escalation would not be intentional. It would be accidental. The transition from controlled conflict to open war did not begin with a strategic decision. It began with an error that no system could immediately explain. On May 23 at 03:18 UTC, early warning networks across multiple regions detected a confirmed ballistic trajectory rising from a remote interior launch site. The signal was clear, stable, and consistent with long-range delivery profiles. Within seconds, automated verification protocols activated across strategic command centers. Secondary sensors confirmed ascent. Tracking systems calculated potential impact envelopes, none aligned with declared test corridors. For 4 minutes, every system assumed the same possibility. Strategic forces elevated to maximum readiness. Submarines received coded transmissions. Bombers prepared for launch. Missile defense networks transitioned from monitoring to engagement posture. Communication channels flooded with verification requests, routed through diplomatic backlines and emergency contacts long unused. At 03:22 UTC, the trajectory collapsed. The object disintegrated at high altitude. Debris burned harmlessly in the upper atmosphere. Later analysis would suggest a catastrophic failure during a conventional test, combined with sensor misinterpretation across multiple networks. At the time, none of that mattered. For 4 minutes, both sides had prepared for irreversible escalation, and once systems reached that level of readiness, they did not return easily. The incident became known internally as the 4-minute window. In the hours that followed, communication channels reopened urgently. Messages passed through neutral states. Language softened publicly. Privately, doctrines shifted. Launch thresholds were reviewed, then lowered. Response timelines shortened. Systems were recalibrated for faster decision cycles under the assumption that the next anomaly might not resolve itself harmlessly. The balance of deterrence moved from certainty to fear of miscalculation. On May 25th, the first sustained exchange of kinetic force occurred across multiple domains simultaneously. It lasted less than 3 hours. It changed everything. At 09:14 UTC, a naval patrol operating in international waters detected incoming missile signatures from beyond radar horizon. Defensive systems engaged automatically. Interceptors launched. 2 incoming missiles were destroyed mid-flight. A third penetrated the defensive envelope and struck the patrol vessel's forward section. Damage was severe but contained. Casualty numbers remained classified. The vessel remained afloat long enough for evacuation. Within minutes, retaliatory strikes targeted the launch origin using long-range precision systems. The response avoided major population centers by design. Infrastructure damage was limited but unmistakable. Satellite imagery confirmed impact sites within hours. Public statements from both sides described the events as defensive actions following provocation. The distinction mattered less than the precedent. Direct force had been exchanged openly. Markets reacted immediately. Shipping insurance collapsed across several regions. Energy prices surged beyond historic thresholds. Governments initiated controlled release of strategic reserves. Civil defense messaging appeared on public broadcasts for the first time in generations. The war now had visible consequences. On May 27th, coordinated cyber operations disrupted electrical grids across multiple cities for several hours. Backup systems restored power gradually. Hospitals operated on emergency generators. Transportation networks halted temporarily. The attacks avoided permanent damage but demonstrated reach. Civilian populations experienced the conflict directly for the first time. Public confidence shifted from abstract concern to immediate awareness. On May 29th, airspace incidents multiplied. Interceptors from both sides engaged in aggressive maneuvering near contested monitoring zones. Radar locks hardened. Electronic warfare intensified. At 16:47 local time, an aircraft from a multinational patrol formation reported missile launch indicators. Countermeasures deployed automatically. One missile detonated prematurely. The second struck the aircraft's rear section. Wreckage fell into open sea. Rescue teams recovered debris hours later. Casualties were confirmed but not publicly detailed. Retaliation followed within hours. Precision strikes targeted the airbase believed to support the launch. Runways were cratered, fuel storage ignited. The strike avoided permanent structural destruction but rendered the base inoperable temporarily. The exchange marked the first sustained aerial losses of the conflict. On May 31st, space became an active theater. Multiple satellites reported proximity maneuvers by opposing platforms. Sensor interference increased. One communications satellite experienced catastrophic orientation failure and drifted out of operational alignment. No debris field indicated collision. Analysts concluded a directed energy event had temporarily blinded its guidance systems. Hours later, a separate satellite experienced similar interference. The pattern suggested deliberate parity. Orbital space, once a support domain, had become contested territory. By early June, the distinction between preparation and execution vanished completely. Mobilization orders moved from partial to full readiness across multiple regions. Reserve units activated openly. Strategic bombers conducted continuous patrol cycles. Naval formations operated in persistent combat configurations rather than rotational presence. The conflict no longer required interpretation. It required management. On June 3rd, the largest naval engagement of the war occurred in the North Atlantic. Dozens of surface vessels, supported by submarines and aircraft, converged within overlapping engagement zones. Missile launches occurred in rapid succession. Air defense systems intercepted many. Some reached targets. Several vessels sustained critical damage. At least 2 sank before rescue operations could stabilize survivors. Casualty numbers were significant. Neither side claimed victory. Both sides claimed necessity. Autonomous systems played a decisive role. Drones selected targets faster than human operators could verify. Defensive algorithms calculated acceptable loss thresholds in real time. Commanders remained override authority, but decision windows had compressed to seconds. Human judgment remained present, but increasingly constrained by machine speed. On May 5th, global trade networks faltered under cumulative disruption. Major ports operated at reduced capacity due to cyber interference and security concerns. Supply chains rerouted through longer, less efficient corridors. Food and fuel shortages began appearing in regions far removed from direct combat zones. Governments introduced rationing measures quietly at first, then publicly as conditions persisted. The home front had arrived. Protests erupted in multiple cities worldwide. Some demanded de-escalation, others demanded decisive victory. Governments expanded emergency powers carefully, framing them as temporary measures for stability and security. Information controls tightened subtly. Independent reporting from conflict zones became increasingly difficult. On June 7th, early warning systems again detected anomalous launch signatures. The transition from controlled conflict to open war did not begin with a strategic decision. It began with an error that no system could immediately explain. On May 23 at 03:18 UTC, early warning networks across multiple regions detected a confirmed ballistic trajectory rising from a remote interior launch site. The signal was clear, stable, and consistent with long-range delivery profiles. Within seconds, automated verification protocols activated across strategic command centers. Secondary sensors confirmed ascent. Tracking systems calculated potential impact envelopes, none aligned with declared test corridors. For 4 minutes, every system assumed the same possibility. Strategic forces elevated to maximum readiness. Submarines received coded transmissions. Bombers prepared for launch. Missile defense networks transitioned from monitoring to engagement posture. Communication channels flooded with verification requests, routed through diplomatic backlines and emergency contacts long unused. At 03:22 UTC, the trajectory collapsed. The object disintegrated at high altitude. Debris burned harmlessly in the upper atmosphere. Later analysis would suggest a catastrophic failure during a conventional test, combined with sensor misinterpretation across multiple networks. At the time, none of that mattered. For 4 minutes, both sides had prepared for irreversible escalation, and once systems reached that level of readiness, they did not return easily. The incident became known internally as the 4-minute window. In the hours that followed, communication channels reopened urgently. Messages passed through neutral states. Language softened publicly. Privately, doctrines shifted. Launch thresholds were reviewed, then lowered. Response timelines shortened. Systems were recalibrated for faster decision cycles under the assumption that the next anomaly might not resolve itself harmlessly. The balance of deterrence moved from certainty to fear of miscalculation. On May 25th, the first sustained exchange of kinetic force occurred across multiple domains simultaneously. It lasted less than 3 hours. It changed everything. At 09:14 UTC, a naval patrol operating in international waters detected incoming missile signatures from beyond radar horizon. Defensive systems engaged automatically. Interceptors launched. 2 incoming missiles were destroyed mid-flight. A third penetrated the defensive envelope and struck the patrol vessel's forward section. Damage was severe but contained. Casualty numbers remained classified. The vessel remained afloat long enough for evacuation. Within minutes, retaliatory strikes targeted the launch origin using long-range precision systems. The response